Welcome back to the Now Morning Show, 50 minutes past the hour of 7 o'clock. And our next conversation, we're focusing on leading through change in the Caribbean workplace. Joining us is Leisel Douglas, Chief Communicator and founder of Pros and Comms Limited. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. It's a pleasure to have you on set.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's been a while. I've missed the team, but it's always good to come back.
And it's good to have you here because we've already gotten some pertinent information this morning.
Indeed, indeed.
So let's go across to the community conference. What inspired the vision behind it?
So Community started for the first time last year. And what I wanted to do was create a safe space for not just communication professionals, but really any and everybody, because we don't really understand how fundamental communication is to our everyday way of life. And I wanted to create a safe space where experts can come and share their knowledge and their tools and their resources, but also where people who are not experts, who may be just getting started in the field, or maybe those who just want to improve their communication, can come and learn and share and not be judged and walk away immediately with actionable tips and strategies that they could implement in their workplaces or even in their personal lives.
Is it that you identified a gap in the market last year and said, all right, it's time to do something to bring a change? Like, what was the propelling factor to create this?
I think I identified a gap in the market way before last year, but last year was probably the first time that I got the courage to take the risk to do an event like this. I don't believe, and I stand to be corrected, but I don't believe there is an event quite specifically for communicators in the country or even in the Caribbean region. And what I have found is that even though we do have training options available, a lot of them are set in the context of not the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And so what I wanted to do was have the real conversations about topics that affect us globally, but set against a Caribbean context. And so that's why Community was really born.
Yeah, something that is so important as well in the Caribbean context, because you see so many things floating around, especially in the advent of TikTok and Instagram. Things are shared and you sort of sit there and go, okay, but I can't apply this to me. So as you mentioned that particularly, what defining outcomes do you hope those who attend take away from it, and specifically Caribbean leaders? What defining outcomes will they take away from the conference?
Well, communication is really a top-down thing, right? So the approach here is that, as I mentioned, you get actionable tools, tips, and strategies that you can implement, whether it is you're in an organization, whether you're an entrepreneur, or whether you're a person. But more importantly for me, communication is a societal thing. Oftentimes we refer to communication alone within a corporate setting or within a business setting, and we have a lot of communicators who are very niche, depending on where they may work. At Community, the focus on communication is, yes, obviously primarily for corporate, but secondarily for society. And so that starts in the homes in terms of how do we speak about certain things, how do we address people. So for example, last year we had a beautiful session with Shayna and Keisha talking about protocol. And this year we're going to have a session on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Obviously centered in the workplace, but these conversations start at home. When you get to work, you've already been socialized in how you communicate and how you think at home. So what we're doing is trying to change the narrative from a top-down perspective, but also with the hope that it permeates into the homes as well, and so that we can see a societal shift as we continue to adapt, as the world continues to change.
And the world is continuing to change, and it's definitely I'm not going to use the term lofty, but what I will say is that you are far-reaching with this and encompassing everything, especially with the mention of DEI, because we see a lot of people who automatically associate that with the United States of America and may say, well, you know, that's not our culture. What words do you have for those?
Well, you know, we live in a multi-ethnic society. So I think on some level, having to put a focus on that is something that we kind of ignore because we have so many different races already coexisting. But it is important to get very granular in the conversation to understand how these things affect how we interact with each other, how we communicate. And that obviously is going to affect the bottom line of a business. So I think we need to not take anything for granted, which is the challenge that we run into when when we start to speak about something like communication, because it is so much a part of our everyday lives, it is easy for us to overlook it. And so things like DEI become buzzwords or buzz terminologies, as opposed to having the emphasis really placed on it and breaking that down to understand how it can impact, for example, our company culture, which is another thing that we're going to be looking at the conference in terms of how does your communication shape your company culture. You know, when we talk about company culture, we wrap it in a lot of nice words, or mission, or vision, or objective, or core pillars. You know, we find a lot of ways to make it sound and look appealing. But how does this really translate to your internal customers, who are your employees? How does this translate to your external customers? And if you're in the C-suite and obviously you're looking at the bottom line, how does this impact your KPI? And how can you make this more efficient? And you can do that, we believe, by starting with a me-first approach to communications, which is yet another topic that we're dealing with at the conference. And that is really, how can I communicate better for myself? One of the things that we take for granted is that we all walk around with trauma, with triggers. We've all been, again, going back to the home, socialized in a particular way. And we don't understand that how we communicate impacts our efficiency, not just how we present ourselves, but how we are understood. And as a result of that, the results we get. So if we look at ourselves first, understand our communication style, what our triggers may be, what our weaknesses are, then we know exactly where and what we need to work on. And that's going to translate across the board as being more efficient and effective communicators.
Now, as you mentioned that, what about the way that what we say and how it's received particularly? Because that's a big part of it as well. We can communicate and think we're communicating as well as we want to, but it may not be received in the best way. Would you say our culture also shapes that in our identity?
In the Caribbean context, that is, you know, easily a pain point, because, of course, we speak with all of ourselves.
Of course.
Our facial expressions, our body language, our hands. I mean, I have been told on numerous occasions, even walking in here, right? I was told about my body language and how I look and how I may come across. So it's definitely something to consider. But more importantly for me, if I were to isolate one thing coming out of that, it will be our avoidance of confrontation and difficult conversations, especially in the workplace. And so what we need to really, again, zero in on is, what are our flaws? What are our weaknesses? How can we communicate this in strength? Do we have the emotional intelligence, the soft skills to communicate what we need to communicate? Because the reality is that we need to have these difficult conversations. And we're finding, especially coming down in the C-suite, or those persons who are in managerial positions across the organizations for team members, there is an avoidance of conflict.
Now, with the avoidance of conflict, could that also be related to trust? And is this something that you're going to be touching on?
So trust directly correlates to your company culture. Through your communication, are you exemplifying that this is a safe space in the organization, that this is what we stand for, these are the roles and responsibilities, and as an employee, I have communicated effectively to you what your role and function is within the organization and how that plays a role into the bigger objective? And do you have the tools, the mechanisms, and the spaces to go if you need to have a conversation, as opposed to just those water cooler moments?
Yeah.
You know, so building trust, again, comes out of the company culture, and that, again, starts with how do you communicate that?
Something that's so important. Many times communication just seems like we know it's there, but it goes to the wayside.
Exactly.
So it's great that you're having this. It's happening tomorrow.
It's
Wednesday, the 2nd of July.
Yes.
Can we circle back to who your target audience is? Because we heard a lot of, C-suite, but I know you would have mentioned earlier as well that this is for everybody.
So when this was, dreamt up, community was really meant for everybody, with a specific focus to communicators, those of us who directly operate in the fields of corporate communications. And then we realized that, it's no longer just you have a department that deals with communication anymore, but you find that you have HR persons who are tasked with some communication tasks as well. Your sales personnel, your business development team. So anybody who really needs to be able to communicate effectively in order to affect your organization. And what we've realized is that that's everybody. Last year at the conference, we had a speaker, Anthony Watkins, who started us off. And he was really phenomenal because he started us off from a very personal perspective and showing how that could impact in your communication in the workplace. And what we found at the very start of the conference is people opening up in the room about traumatic experiences that they may have have experience as a child and how they unknowingly brought that into the workplace. So last year, being the first community, I mean, it was a lot of testing ground. And as we continue annually, we're going to refine the product. But what that taught me is that, you have to put a primary target audience, but really and truly, this conference is for anybody. Anybody will benefit.
So where can we get more information about this?
So you can check out our website. It's www.prosandcoms.co/community, or Instagram as well is prosandcoms.co. And we have all of the information available, including the price as well as the value offers. The event is tomorrow morning at Petria Hall out there in Center of Excellence in Macoya, but we are still accepting, sign-ups up to a point in time because there are certain things that we have to make allowances for in that. But I will encourage everybody, if you are now hearing this for the first time, at the very least, check it out, see what the conference is about, and if you can't make it this year, then we look forward to seeing you next year.
So what's in the future for the conference?
So community is a movement that we are really starting, and what's in the future after the conference is we're going to be breaking that out into smaller sessions or community clubhouse sessions, which are going to entail meetups, networking events, and smaller training programs. And then next year, of course, we're going to do the conference again, hopefully on July 2nd, once it's not on a weekend. And we will continue to refine the product as we go and we get feedback from the participants.
Is there any particular reason why it's being held on the same date?
No. Last year when I started it, this was my birthday gift to myself. Okay. And so that's just the date that we're doing it.
Powerful women born in the July season. Absolutely wonderful. Now, you did mention what happened last year, and I know you just also gently mentioned some of the speakers that are going to be here this year. Can you recap those for us?
Sure. So this year we're going to be looking at our topics. We'll start from a Me First approach to communications. We have Stacey Smith-Henderson, who's flying in from Canada to give us that presentation. We're going to be looking at the changing face of PR. As we know, it's all about digital, social. So how does that impact how we show up and how we get PR? Of course, we're going to have Nicole Duke-Westfield lead us in that discussion. Communications and company culture, we have Dale Lutchman as well as Julie Turney. Julie is flying in from Barbados to talk to us about that. They're sharing that segment as well. And then we are going to be speaking to Lady Lava. Okay. Because at the end of the day, communication is really a part of storytelling. And if we're talking about things in a Caribbean context and set against a Caribbean backdrop, we know we love to tell stories. And she is, a relatively new artist who has emerged, but emerged very powerfully and convincingly. I think her storytelling is something that we can all learn from, and not just how she communicates her message, but how she has managed to communicate and build herself a strong brand that now corporate entities would like to align themselves with. So if we're talking about the world of influencer marketing and how to be somebody of influence, I think that she's somebody right now who's very relatable that we can sit and have a conversation with. And of course, as I mentioned before, the conversation on DEI and how to measure internal communications, that's going to be led by Janelle Pascal. And it's important that we put the measurement in there of how do you measure internal communications, because very much so what's in this space is that communications is a social science, and it can be a bit lofty. And so C-suite, we find the feedback is we don't know how to measure this. So therefore, how do we equate to having somebody specifically on staff to really have this as their focal point? We're going to show you how.
Transformational, that is for sure. And knowing that it's going to be very well attended, looking forward to the next one and many more to come, but also looking forward to seeing the way you and your team are going to be changing the face of communications, not just in Trinidad and Tobago, but in the region particularly. Also, Leisel, any closing comments for Trinidad and Tobago?
Just that we're very excited to put on Community the Conference. We feel that this is even a stronger showing than what we did last year. And last year, if you were in the room or if you saw the feedback, you'll know that it was phenomenal. And I just want to encourage everybody to please take a look at the event, understand what it is we're doing. And as I mentioned before, we would love to see you at Center of Excellence tomorrow. But if you can't make it for this year, stay tuned to all of our pages, follow, and be sure to catch one of our upcoming events.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And have a wonderful birthday.
Same to you.
Thank you. Leisel Douglas with us this morning, Chief Communicator and founder of Pros and Coms Limited, and also the Community Conference 2025 happening tomorrow in the Center of Excellence. Stay tuned. The Now Morning Show will be back right after this.
It's lava. It's an reward in being the best girl. It's an a trophy in